Methodologies, a chemsex study, a video, is a 4.5 minute piece that we created initially as kind of a promo for a promotional piece for the public forum. But it didn't take long for us to realize that, this is also an excellent opportunity to kind of essentialize the points in the study. And then the soundtrack, or musical soundtrack, is a hybrid of moments from select tracks from the two records. So it's kind of really is a kind of a little gem of everything in 4.5 minutes.
I have said this every time I fucking open my mouth and talk about drugs, is that we stopped doing fear-based sexual health education in the 80s, the 90s, but we still refuse to allow there to be substance-positive drug use education. It still always has to have the caveat of, like, this could fuck your life up. It's like, well, so could an unplanned pregnancy.
I think that gay spaces, queer spaces have to recognize the importance and the relevance of understanding and learning about crystal meth and PNP, because the assumption that these things are not happening in your space shows a lack of competence in your own. But the slogan is silence equals death. I don't understand why we don't take that on when it comes to substance. Why we've forgotten that lesson that silence equals death. If we're not going to discuss it, then we're not going to get anywhere because of it.
Low barrier.
You're just going to go and have a good time. You're going to do this little piece of work while you're there, as a way to sort of like
make it low barrier. Low barrier.
I've been thinking a lot about this because we're looking at doing an intervention at work where we're going to train people in the community to just be sort of pure health educators, not in a formal way, but like if you're going to a party and you're going to be fucking a bunch of guys anyway, how about you bring some kids with you? How about you bring some information about PrEP or testing with you? And if guys have questions, they know they can ask you because you have the training, but you're not there being like a Girl Scout or a Boy Scout. You're just going to go and have a good time. You're going to do this little piece of work while you're there as a way to sort of make it low barrier. Guys don't have to come into a service. They don't have to go to a harm reduction center where they may not feel good.
If you look at the demographics, one of the demographics of people who really get hurt by this are older men with, I guess, histories of trauma, like as we all have, right? The guys that I've known that have gotten into it, it's been really destructive for them, right? I really worry about it. And I worry too about the younger guys who are being initiated into it.
I found this really hot daddy, right? I mean, I really like him. He's really nice. But is it true that you can't have sex if you use crystal meth with somebody who isn't using? This guy says he'd like to have sex with me and I want to have sex with him, but he says he won't have sex with me unless I use crystal meth with him.
I'm dirty. I'm positive. I'm responsible.
These are all true things. You might try things that have been in the back of your mind for so long. You want to try it, but you got an internalized shame around kink or fetish or whatever that might be. You haven't had the courage to say it out loud.
I'm responsible. I party living. I bear back. I'm positive.
and responsible.
Party bareback positive responsible. Living with meth. Slam dance. User. These are a few of the title tracks from the Methodology records. I'm Patrick Marano, and art meets chemsex on this episode of Queerly Us. Joining me today is Dr. Andrew Zealley, an artist researcher who explores and responds to HIV, queerness, risk, public sex practices, and the body. I'm going to ask him how he makes art from these topics. And we have a professor in the School of Social Work and coordinator of the Sexuality Studies program at York University, Dr. Nick Mule. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hello, Patrick.
Oh my gosh.
Thanks for having us.
Of course, my God, it's my pleasure. When I heard about, the words like chemsex, PMP, public sex, meth, all of these terms resonate so deeply with me because I have a history with all of these things. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people don't talk about these things. They're pushed in the shadows, they're taboo, they're stigmatized. On my YouTube channel, I try to bring all of this out into the open so that we can talk about it, because there shouldn't be any shame, I feel, around it. And the more stigmatized it is, as you know, the more dangerous it becomes. So I have in my 20s, I spent a lot of my 20s sort of P&Ping, if you will. So I have a very close relationship with meth and sex in the past. That's in my past. But I wanted to ask you guys, that's my segue. I wanted to ask you guys, why this topic? I'll start with Nick. What is it that drew you to this topic?
In some ways, I have to credit Andrew for this, because I was working and continue to work on one of my research studies that I've called Dark Tribe. And this study looks at sexual spaces for men who are seeking sexual pleasure from other men, so men seeking sex from each other. And for the most part, I look at indoor spaces such as bathhouses. In Europe, they're known as dark rooms, in terms of the backs of bars, sex clubs, places like that. And the importance of those spaces so that men can find each other and engage in that kind of sexual pleasure. Inevitably, when you're looking at or having experiences in such spaces, you're going to come into contact with substances. And meth is a particular kind of substance that has particular kinds of effects on people who use. And it was Andrew who approached me about this particular topic, and I saw a real fit between that and my Dark Tribe study. And the other piece I would add to this is something you said yourself, Patrick, and that is something that's not really talked about. And that's a major flag for those of us who do research, at least those of us who do research that's progressive and critical, and that is to look at things that people are not really looking at. And this is not something that's been talked about a whole lot, and we felt, both Andrew and I felt this is something that needs more exposure, needs more of an in-depth research, kind of exploration of what's going on there. Why are people choosing to do this? Why are they engaging with it? And the advantages, disadvantages, what have you, that kind of importance of exposing more and creating dialogue, which is why we're so grateful for being here today with you.
Oh, well, thank you. The pleasure is mine having you two here. And so, Andrew, same question for you. What initially drew you to the topic of this?
Yeah, I was doing in 2021, I finished my PhD, and my research was on risk, specifically risk in relationship to artistic practice and sexual practices, and looking at kind of biopolitics of HIV/AIDS, as well as artistic responses and the role of art in the history of the AIDS crisis, certainly in the pre-treatment era, and then continuing as the AIDS crisis went indoors and became more of a private issue, artists continued to kind of feed into that, or respond to that, I should say. The significant turning point for me was the article that Tim McCaskill, his editorial in Now magazine, which I believe was in January 2019, which caused a lot of controversy. And Tim was writing that he critiquing the silence around meth use, particularly in gay sexual communities, and using safer sex messaging as an example of the community responding to a serious issue, and why was there no messaging about meth use, considering in his perspective how it was just across the board a destructive substance in people's lives. And then what happened, and then 3 weeks after that piece was published in Now, there was a rebuttal by a group of younger activists who were responding to McCaskill's article and saying how his position was stigmatizing and shaming for users. And I was quite fascinated by this kind of the polarity of the positions and the space in between the two. And I just, my general tendency when it comes to kind of radical issues or things in the margins was I just wanted to jump into that space between and dig down to find out what was going on, just my kind of curiosity. And when I finished my PhD, I approached Nick because I read about his Dark Tribe research, as well as the new queer liberation theory that he's been working on. And I approached him specifically to do a postdoc, but I think the topic of chemsex was a little too rich for the institution. And so they said no as a postdoc. However, Nick and I said yes to a research partnership on this, just because it really, again, means so much to us to explore these areas of queerness that are silenced or erased in the general picture. Yeah, so it has been a 2-year trajectory of inquiry and production that has been quite rich, actually.
I resonate with all of this, and on my YouTube channel I have a playlist called Cruising. So when we talk about public sex and stuff like that, that really also resonates with me. And you both mentioned Dark Tribe, which I hadn't heard of until right now. Nick, did you want to go into a little bit about Dark Tribe and how that began and what the purpose of that project was for you?
Yeah. Dark Tribe, I mean, it started off just drawing from my own personal experiences of making use of sexual spaces to seek out sexual pleasure with other men. And normally I try to separate out pleasure from business, and I try not to kind of mix academia with that. But when I started to see that these spaces were starting to shrink, starting to disappear, they were becoming more and more limited, I started to become concerned about why that was happening, and looking at has it been acknowledged, has it been documented, the importance of having such spaces, and saw that there's very little out there. And so I thought to myself, throw away this rule of separating pleasure from business per se, and bring some attention to this. And so I wanted to do that. And it's interesting. I mean, Andrew mentioned my theorization work on queer liberation, and I was very fortunate to get funding for that allows me to do some international work on that front, which allowed me to travel. And so by day, I was doing that work to theorize queer liberation. And by night, I was doing Dark Tribe work, going to these sex clubs and going to these places and noting what was happening there and why they were so important. And so places like Australia and Europe and here in North America. And so that's how it kind of came about, a way of looking at the importance of these spaces. There is a theory out there known as space theory or spatial theory, that looks at the importance of spaces and how they are turned into places of meaning for people. And there's very little in that area that actually looks at sexual spaces. And that's really what drew me to this. Yeah.
What would you say then? Because I get comments on my channel. I mean, I feel like I'm bringing these topics to the forefront also through YouTube and my channel, and I get comments sometimes, you know, oh, you're setting us back, the gay movement backwards, by talking about, you know, sex. Why would you promote or talk about, you know, sex in public spaces when there's apps and stuff like that? So I get a lot of negative pushback from some of those videos. What would you say to those people, Nick?
My instant reaction is, why not? Why are we not talking about that? And why are people not looking at the limitations of apps, for that matter? Not to say that apps can't facilitate spaces for groups of guys to come together, but a lot of these spaces that do exist, especially in certain key cities in Europe, they really facilitate them in such a way that they recognize and value them for their worth, for gay men, bisexual men, trans men to come together and have sexual pleasure with each other. And so there's something kind of delimiting when it comes to apps around it. It tends to be more so one-on-one. And yes, like, you know, I will acknowledge there's opportunities to come together as groups as well. But when you have a space, which albeit it being business oriented in terms of paying a fee to enter the space and make use of the space, there's an acknowledgement of its importance, the importance of having bathhouses, the importance of having sex clubs, right? It's part of adult pleasure and play. And why are we denying that? That's not going backwards. I think to deny it is limiting ourselves and restricting ourselves from our true feelings.
Andrew.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, because Nick brought up an interesting point, and I'm working on a new record right now, and in one track, the individual who's speaking is talking about the difference between the space that's represented by apps such as Grindr versus the physical space that's represented by a bathhouse or public sex and cruising. And that is that when you are using an app, first of all, an app already presupposes that you have the economy to have a digital phone,
right?
You know, and that you participate in all of that. So we have to. That's where it starts. Second of all, in that kind of digital world, regardless of whether that's your goal or not, it's hard to not create a kind of mental checklist when you're going through Grindr and seeing all the lists of the person's stats. You start to create a mental checklist of what it is you're looking for. And as the person in this track says, this, not this. And that becomes kind of a mindset. Whereas when you go to a bathhouse or a park, you tend to you know, you go there looking for sex, and you're in an environment with other men who are seeking sex, and you make it happen regardless of who the people are. And often it leads to kind of meaningful social contact that collapses boundaries of economy, class, age, ability, race, all of these things, so that you can have, you know, a barista, auto worker, and a banker in a dark room together, and they may not know that, but it's happening. And even though, as Nick says, you know, there is this kind of issue of businesses like bathhouses and bars being first and foremost a monetization practice, kind of monetizing on queer desire, it still does, in the case of the bathhouse, offer an opportunity to explore your sexual desires and to collapse those boundaries, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, with me, you're preaching to the choir. I also have a playlist on my channel called Bathhouse Betty, where I review bathhouses, I talk about bathhouse etiquette, and I really promote the culture. I personally do not like the apps at all. I find them a waste of time. Everybody's being very fake on them. The profiles, you don't know who you're speaking to really. People have a tendency to be very rude because they can be. They're hiding behind the keyboard. So I just like the honesty and the vulnerability and just the in the moment spontaneity of those spaces like bathhouses and stuff like that.
And it's kind of etiquette protocol on how to manage yourself in that space,
Mm-hmm.
so that you're not, you're not hopefully insulting someone when you reject them. You very politely say, no, no thanks.
Yeah, that's right. And you get to develop people skills, which we're losing.
Yes.
Like in-person dialogue and people skills. And I find
right.
we're losing that ability to relate to each other and stuff.
That's right.
Andrew, I wanted to ask you about, well, first of all, let's talk about methodology for a little bit. And I wanted to ask, why vinyl? Because you chose a very specific medium for your project.
As a practicing artist, my work is interdisciplinary in nature, but has since the beginning of my artistic career has been rooted in sound and music and listening practices. And vinyl has been close to my heart since I bought my first vinyl record with my own money at the age of 10. And I was encouraged by my father to listen to a lot of vinyl and collect it, and I continue to do that. And what I like in vinyl is the physicality, the physical experience. And Nick and I have talked about this a lot. When you buy a record, you listen to it, and while you're listening to it, you look at the cover, you maybe read the liner notes. It's kind of a more immersive experience than a CD, which has a tiny booklet, and then of course the CD is basically gone. It's actually now in a resurgence period.
That's right.
That tells you how old it is. All you end up with are a series of digital files that have no visual to them, and I like that kind of entanglement of visual art, text-based art, and sound coming together in the phonograph record.
Then on the tracks themselves, I had a listen, and like for example, slam dance. Well, if people don't know, well, first of all, you're talking about slamming, right? When you talk about slam, okay. So injecting, that's right. So if you're listening and you don't know what slamming is, it's when you inject meth. So slam dance, there's vocals in the background. So that's not the only one. I know there's other ones. Is it? So I think you just sort of touched on it. Is it interviews with people, users and their experiences, and then you've mixed it into this?
We interviewed a variety of people from the meth spectrum. Harm reduction workers, artists, activists, social and sexual space, queer social and sexual space, management and workers, public health, queer specific health counselors, therapists, users. It was a real spectrum of people that we spoke with. And in terms of the record, it is in fact the participant interviews, which I then go through each one, deep listening to each one, selecting certain statements that resonate for me, and create a new narrative out of those by editing them and weaving them together. Sometimes one voice, sometimes more than one voice. So it creates a kind of conversational narrative within each track, and trying to cover the very specific themes that emerge through the interviews.
The interviews were done with the intention of creating the records? Okay. And
that was from the onset.
Right. And you're doing the editing yourself, or?
Yeah, I'm sitting in my sound studio right now.
Yeah. That's amazing. And the beats, where are the beats coming from? That's you as well?
There's all stuff that I created. In this case, with this record, it's very much wave shaping. So I was using sound oscillators and generating the sounds from the basic tone, and then kind of taking them up and starting to treat them in different ways. And creating kind of well, programming beats and then creating kind of counterpoint between the different instruments and the percussive beats and the voices themselves, and often using the voices and editing them down and then treating them so they also become kind of a textural component as opposed to a literal kind of language-based component.
Right. So you're a musician.
Yes, I just a term I
Producer.
don't really use.
Well, I guess
I
you
like
know
working with
music.
sound.
Okay.
Music is kind of a complicated thing for me.
Yeah. I mean, but there's melodies and there's
Yes, there are.
you know,
Yeah.
it's not just like pots and pans banging together. It's
Yes,
yeah.
yeah. John Cage says that what is music? Well, music is organized sound that has been organized.
Mm.
So he says that even if you stand out on a street corner, you hear the cars and you hear all these things, but in your mind, you can put them together to create a counterpoint.
Okay. Um, methodologies, a chemsex study public forum that happened at Buddies in Bad Times here in Toronto. Nick, what kind of research had to go into, because it was talking about chemsex and P&P culture, the focus on that. But I'm curious what kind of research was done. I guess Andrew touched on it a little bit for the methodology vinyl. For the forum, it was the same. Was it the same research?
Yes, it was. And as Andrew was talking about, we conducted 16 interviews with the varied people he had mentioned. And it's worth pointing out too that what was really interesting about that is that a number of the people we interviewed wore multiple hats. So you would be talking, for example, to a healthcare provider who would disclose in the interview that they're also a user. This would happen repeatedly in terms of people being in various spaces and places at the same time in their own life experiences when it comes to meth. So that was quite interesting, that kind of overlay. And so initially, the study operated in a very typical social scientific way of conducting these qualitative, semi-structured interviews with open-ended questions, very conversational style, very comfortable. They were recorded, they were transcribed, and typically we drew out themes from them. That's a very social scientific way of doing qualitative research, and that helps with our writing with this. And at the same time, Andrew, drawing from those very same themes, was listening very carefully to what they were saying, actual terminology, actual sayings, terms that are used in slang terms around meth use and stuff, and then drawing ideas out of that to create the music. So it was a bit of a process that you get your initial data, and then what do you do with it? How do you take something that's social scientific into something that's more artistic?
Yeah.
And from there, our forum at Buddies in Bad Times Theater back on March 21st was an event to kind of bring forth, launch our outputs and open dialogue. Those were our major reasons for doing that. We wanted to bring it back to the community, share it with everyone, open up a bit of a dialogue, and do it in a creative way, not your kind of standard, typical scientific paper kind of presentation, but rather going through the themes, listening to various tracks of music, various samplings, and opening up discussion about the topic.
Right. I'm curious, how easy or difficult was it to find participants for the study?
Complicated.
Yes, it was a bit complicated.
Was it? Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I think stigma just stands in the way of this in such a major way that it made it very difficult for people to speak about it. In some ways, the harm reduction workers, the healthcare workers were a little bit more forthcoming because they could point to their work and say, we've got programming in this area, this is how we handle it, and things like that. Users were a little bit more reticent to come forward, but eventually we were able to find some. I will also share that we were not successful in a couple of areas. There were repeated attempts to speak to a dealer, and 3 times appointments were set up, and all 3 times he didn't show up. So that was disappointing, and I made repeated attempts to get someone at Toronto Public Health to talk to me. about this issue, and there was a lot of a bit of a runaround they put me on, and eventually they did just finally conclude that they weren't able to provide us with an interview because they're not doing any work in the area. I mean, it took them that long to actually get to that point, and then that was an admission to us that Toronto Public Health is not even looking at this, you know.
So I'm not surprised about the dealers. I guess they're concerned that, you know,
yeah,
they don't want to get caught. They don't want to against the law and whatnot. But Toronto Public Health, that doesn't make any sense to me. I don't. Did they give you any reason why?
Well, it was to some extent in the context of COVID, but I will say when we finally got that word, it was more towards the tail end of COVID because they were quite overwhelmed with all of that, and I gave space for that. I even held off for a number of months and contacted them again and stuff. But I again, is it the heaviness of the stigma of this use that they're not aware to what extent it's happening?
Yeah.
Is it because gay, bisexual, trans men are a minority, and again, they're not that connected? I don't know. They didn't give a reason to answer your question, but just they just kind of closed off by saying we have nothing to offer in this area because we're not doing any work in it. So we won't do the interview.
Which
it's not.
Yeah.
It's not particularly surprising because Toronto Public Health has a history of kind of putting queer health issues to the side, I think so.
Which is, I mean, I don't want to say shocking is too big of a word, but surprising maybe for a city the size of Toronto. For me, I would think, you know, Toronto Public Health would be more inclusive in their.
Well, it's a conversation about sex, so that's already makes it complicated for an institutionalized body to discuss. And then you talk about queer sex, and it becomes even more, they're even more reticent to talk about it because, you know, sex itself is a complicated issue to discuss, and there's a lot of moralizing and ethical issues and concerns that are raised, whether they have value or not. You know, I personally think it's better to be talking about sex, to talk about sex outside of a reproductive model, because it happens and it's a healthy part of our lives is to be sexual as part of pleasure is an integral part of our personal health. So
absolutely
embodied and sort of psychological outlook.
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. I wonder when we're ever going to reach the point where we can talk about sex openly without the shame and the stigma. And I guess we're far from that, I would imagine.
Yeah, we still have a stretch to go on that. I mean, the gender conversation that has opened up in the past decade is really important, I think, because it forces people to look at sex, even if gender is not specifically about sex. A lot of people make that connection regardless. So it is kind of forcing the conversation into the public space.
Yeah, which is always good. Whenever there's big pushback from certain groups, you know you're really getting somewhere and you're really digging into some important issues when there's that crazy pushback and then, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're really seeing that in the States right now. There's so much visibility for gay, queer, and trans people that, you know, finally there's all this visibility, even if it's for the most part wrapped up in homonormative kind of codes and imperatives. It is at least happening, and all the straight white people are freaking out.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, there's some kind of elusive entitlement that they can't pinpoint that they're afraid of losing. But
yep. Okay, Andrew, I'm going to throw this to you since you're the creative in this menage a deux, I guess. Let's talk about the creative outputs that encompass this project, because we haven't talked about the artwork or any of those aspects of it.
Yeah. You know, I spent 10 years in grad studies from 2011 till 2021. I went back to school after 32 years to do my master's. And
congratulations, that's amazing.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I didn't have an undergrad. I got into the master's course because of my standing as an artist and the different work that I've done over the past decades. And I have work in the National Gallery permanent collection and stuff like that. So it just was an opportunity to shift gears in my life because I was, 52 when I went back to school.
That's
And,
amazing.
52.
Inspirational, and it's never too late. I want people to. I always say that.
I think it's actually
Better.
important. Going to school as a senior, a mature student. I mean, you have life experience on your skin, and that makes a big difference in the learning process and what you can bring to the table. And just in relation to something that Nick said about. In his work, he typically separates business and pleasure, or his professional life and his pleasure life, personal life. As an artist, I've kind of made it one of my mandates to engage with very personal and intimate issues in my practice, and it's in part because I think those are critical conversations to uh, uh, engage with in terms of cultural production. But also I really do believe that when you move into things that are of personal interest and value and meaning, that it's an opportunity to imbue the work with something richer or deeper.
I could not agree more. And
Yeah.
actually, that's what I do on my YouTube channel is and I'm blending the pleasure and the work, and I'm hoping that that's going to translate for people, as something
It's also
that's
because
authentic
yeah, and all three of us seem to engage in these kind of uh, uh, marginal worlds, let's call them. Only marginal because the mainstream just kind of pushes down the center. But all three of us understand and participate in those worlds, and we understand the value in them. Even though there's significant shaming and stigmatizing going on, like you said, people say, why would you want to talk about those things? Well, those things are actually happening, and maybe some gay men are happy in a same-sex marriage with supposed monogamy, which I don't think ever works.
Yeah.
And that's my opinion and my experiential opinion.
Yeah.
Anyway,
you guys are my dark tribe. I'll say that for sure.
In terms of the creative things, I really believe that art practice is an important research method, and it allows a space for conversation that doesn't happen in other kinds of academic study. Where there could be limitations around the kind of certain exclusive languages that are used in the academy. And also when you're either making or responding to creative work, it touches you more in an affective way than just an intellectual way. I think you kind of feel it through your whole body when you're looking at something. If it really works for you, it can create a sensation in your body that's physical, that's kind of ineffable. It's impossible to put words to them sometimes, and that's the important thing about art practice as a research method, I think.
Absolutely. Well, walk us through a little bit about the artwork. Let's take a look at some of it.
Yeah. So the the records are the two kind of the first things, and this is the LP, and this is a 12-inch EP or extended play. And we decided to create these two because if we link vinyl records to gay and queer culture, there's a very rich history of music in relationship to queerness. It's what activates a number of queer spaces. I'm just using a blanket word queer rather than trying to spell out everything. Music actually activates a lot of queer spaces, and to me, the DJ is a very significant character in that landscape. And I'm a bit old school because I do believe in vinyl, and I also believe in vinyl in a DJing sense because digital technology allows a DJ to do something flawless if they choose to by beat mixing, whereas the vinyl record actually is a more tactile, sensual experience for the DJ, and it requires a different skill set to move from one record to another, especially when you're trying to create a narrative from all these different locations, as the DJ's weaving through, reading the room is reading the DJ. It's kind of it has a sexual kind of sense to it. It's very intimate. Anyway, so this is the LP, and
Beautiful.
The artwork on these two records was designed by Bill Phelan, and each record comes with an insert.
Yeah.
And in this case, this one has extensive liner notes. And then with the EP, again, featuring one of Bill's pieces on the cover, and then a different insert image.
I mean, it's frameable, right?
Yeah, this is all, yeah, it's artwork. And
Yeah.
and then even on the labels themselves, each label has a different image. And I had first encountered Bill's work online on Instagram, actually. It's a place that I don't do Facebook, but I do Instagram because I'm fascinated by the way that artists use Instagram as a visual platform. And I came across his drawings, Bill Phelan. He's located in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I was quite taken with the immediacy of his drawings. And started following him and communicating with him. And at one point he published a drawing that was this figure, this human figure with these colored lines radiating out of them.
Yeah.
And I was quite taken by it, and I told him that, and it somehow connected with one of our participants who was talking about the experience of when you put a substance into your body, and speaking generally as well as specifically about methamphetamine, is that when it goes inside you, in fact, your inside moves out, and that your skin and everything becomes irrelevant. You're just kind of merging with the exterior.
Sure.
And so these drawings really, for Nick and I, really resonated, and on that particular theory, this kind of exploding body, you know, and merging with the cosmos. And so I negotiated with Bill that, you know, if he could do a couple of drawings for me to choose from, and what he did was actually create 25 individual paintings that are like this big. And he sent me all 25.
Wow.
And said, you choose and do with them as you wish. And so Nick and I carefully went through them and decided on which ones would go where, front cover, insert, labels. And inevitably the rest of the paintings, the set of paintings will be actually, there'll be an edition of the LP that comes with one of the 25 paintings, and I'll be distributing those through Art Metropole in Toronto. So they'll be at a different price, but because you're getting an original artwork, but I think it's important to make those artworks available to people who are interested in having an original painting along with the work, with the audio work. So for me, sound is, you know, we live in the empire of the visual, let's call it. And sound plays a very significant role because it works in more invisible ways. You know, a sound emerges out of one person or an instrument or an object that makes a sound, and then it just travels invisibly through space, and then it encounters a person who takes it in and interprets it in whatever way they do based on their own significance that they put on it. And I've always been fascinated with that aspect of sound moving through space and encountering different people who draw their own significance to it, you know. And actually, I suppose the sound continues limitlessly. It's only the limits of our listening capacities that we think the sound is over, but in fact it's not. Sorry, that was nice. A bit of a tangent.
No. That's I love all that, because it's also, sound is so, everyone's going to interpret it differently, I guess, based on their experiences and their perceptions of things. And sound is so powerful. If you're watching a movie and you put it on mute, I mean, no matter what is happening on the screen, without the sound, it's not going to have that impact, you know. So.
Yeah, and music specifically is a very personal element in people's lives. Whether, you know, I think a lot of people tend to use music as just background. And then there are other people like myself where music is very much foreground, and But across the board, I would say a lot of people use music in their personal identity construction. And that would be, people identify with a certain artist or band, or they might even wear a T-shirt with the images or the name of that person. We move into a particular type of music and occupy it in order to help create who we are. So music has that
100%.
very powerful kind of message. Um, so for me, the goal, theoretical or not, is that these records go into the hands of DJs who then put them to work. So the records are actually kind of like moving objects that continue to do the work after our study is over.
Right. Yeah.
When we're on a dance floor, particularly, we hear a song and the refrain might be something that certain people on the dance floor relate to the refrain, whatever it is that's being spoken in that refrain.
Yeah.
And it becomes a kind of a chorus for us that we adopt, sometimes personally, just in the moment, in a broader sense. So for me, the goal was to create these musics that might share a refrain that's a little different.
Yeah.
And that might actually link to people in more in deeper and more personal ways. Particularly the track on the EP that's called Body, this A side, positive bareback or party bareback positive responsible. And the thing about the EP is that in the history of like disco music and the musics we've had, often an album and a single. And then in the late 70s or mid 70s, you started to get this 12-inch single. They were putting a single track and creating the space for artists to do a longer version or a remix. And the questions about, is the sonic reproduction stronger on a 12-inch format? Anyway, that's part of the rationale behind doing an album at a 12-inch was also to kind of a bit of a basis on that culture of dance music. But that particularly that track was created as an A-side extended house mix track with that artist who created the poster for AIDS Action Now in 2012 that says, "I party, I bareback, I'm positive, I'm responsible," and that created a lot of stir on the streets.
Sure.
But like the Tim McCaskill article in 2019 in Now, it created a stir, but it also opened the doors for a bigger public conversation.
Yeah.
And some people found it shocking or uncomfortable making it first in both of those instances, and later recognized, this is actually important.
Absolutely. Well, and nobody's talking about it, which makes it even more important to talk about. So Nick, it sounds like you had a hand in choosing which artwork went where. So you're a bit of an artist as well, I think, or you have an artistic eye. Right? Let's not downplay that.
Nick has made a really nice film. Nick has made a really nice film.
Yes. Oh, really? What's the film?
Yeah. Queer Edge, From Gay to Queer Liberation. And that was one of the outputs that came out of my queer liberation theory work, which is still ongoing work. But true enough, thanks Andrew for mentioning that. I mean, it's a feature-length documentary, and a real test of my artistic skills and abilities to kind of awaken those and delve into that. But yes, I did have a role in this, and I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed working with Andrew. I mean, on this stuff, that the whole soundscape work Andrew took a lead on because of his experience on that front. The visuals, I think we really put our heads together and worked on those quite well, whether they were the images that were just shown from the artist, as well as the notebook that just flashed there for a second, Andrew, so we can come to that.
See it. Yeah.
This is something else we produced that has a series of visuals inside it as well, that speaks to various paraphernalia that's used in meth use. As well as crystal meth itself. Even we have some porn images in there as well in terms of social sexual pleasure. So yeah, I mean it's we produce that as a kind of a notebook that communicates to the public different facets, different perspectives on meth, and again trying to open up dialogue. It's not giving answers per se, but just information and ideations, quotations, those kinds of things, just to get people thinking about it more and not running from it and not passing judgment on it necessarily. There's a real array of perspectives in there.
There seems to be two camps. It's either you're involved in it and you're stigmatized, or you're the stigmatizer and you've never done it, you don't understand it, so you're just going to judge it. So I think conversations around it are important. Where can people get the booklet, or is it?
The book was originally distributed for free at the public forum. There's only 100 copies of the book.
Oh, I see.
So we distributed it for the people who attended the public forum on the 24th of March, and then the remaining copies, they have some at Art Metropole now on College Street.
Okay.
And I'll be taking some into Glad Day for them to distribute it.
Oh, I was going to say Glad Day. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Those are our two main resources for distributing the book.
Nick, did you want to talk at all about your feature film?
Sure, it's a little separate from methodologies. I mean, its focus is on the development of queer liberation as a theory, and so that study draws from the tenets and principles of the gay liberation movement of the late 60s, early 70s, and tries to bridge them with a kind of critical, progressive, radical queer perspective, as Andrew was saying earlier about us being on the margins, right? It tries to bridge that over into today's kind of politics and activism that tends to be more progressive and pushes the envelope. It's kind of a response to my own critique of assimilationism, that over the last couple of decades, if not 3 decades, our movement, I sometimes separate this out as LGBTs went down this path of respectability and acceptance. Trying to be accepted by the cis, straight, heterosexual, heterosexist world, and trying to fit in through same-sex marriage and children and adoptions and all of that, versus a queer perspective that really celebrates diversity and difference and not being ashamed to be different. And if I link it back to this, not being ashamed to engage in public sex, for example, or to go to places that are designated as sexual spaces, and you want to engage in that and not be stigmatized for it.
That really resonates with me because, like I mentioned earlier, I get a lot of comments on my channel, oh, you're setting us back. And I think those comments are coming from people that feel like they want the assimilation with, heteronormative society. They want to be accepted, so they're going to whitewash their own queerness. And I'm a threat to that for them because I'm talking openly about cruising and bathhouses and sex and all of the queer things that make us so beautiful. And so yeah, to your point, I think it's that assimilation that a lot of people are actually looking for because they want that acceptance. But
and I think the thing about being sexual and cruising and all of that, beyond making us beautiful, it actually is a truthful reflection of who we are. We've had this kind of label of homosexuality and gay, etc., projected onto us. So we assume that we're gay, we're homosexual, but it's actually the so-called straight world that made that projection, and we've adopted it according to that projection. And I think that when we push it to queer, which in some of my other research I've encountered homosexual identified men who don't like the word queer. They prefer to see themselves as gay, and one of them actually saw themselves as deviant. Just took the word deviant.
Wow.
And so whatever floats for you. But I think that it is important to have that kind of pushback and take a word like queer, let's say, and own it. To reappropriate that from its original origins, like we've done with other things in the queer activist world, like the Pink Triangle. for example, reappropriating that from its original iteration as a form of kind of carceral labeling through to kind of a revolution.
Let's say there's just, picking up on what Andrew was talking about. I mean, part of my theorizing work too is kind of getting down to the core, right? What is our authenticity as people, and why are we so concerned about or ashamed of being different? And I mean, people in general, the human race is so diversified. We bring a certain level of diversity to it, and part of it is the authenticness of our sexuality. And when you were saying a little earlier, Patrick, and you're right on the target on this, around this division in the community, around those who, for example, have used crystal meth and have the experience versus those who don't, and the latter tends to judge the former. That creates what became one of our themes in the methodology study of community divide. And if I bridge that with my queer liberation theory work, part of my theorizing on queer liberation is that there is a divide in our community between those who are really aligned with an assimilationist respectability acceptance approach versus those that are more queer oriented, that like to push the envelope. We tend to be located in the margins, but want to celebrate the fact that we are different and we don't need to be ashamed of it. So those kind of internal divides need to be exposed, and we need to kind of work them through and stop passing judgments on each other.
I'm glad you brought it back to the queer liberation, because I wanted to ask you, where can people find it?
The film?
The film, sorry.
The documentary, the documentary itself, Queer Edge, is distributed through VTape. So if they go to VTape distributors,
VTape.org, VTape.org.
Okay, I'll put a link in the description for people then. I have one final question for you. I'll start with you, Nick. What's next for you? What's on the horizon? Any projects?
What a question.
Oh, wow. Okay, maybe pick one. One thing.
Yes, I'm an overwhelmed academic. Well, the work continues in terms of methodologies. Like I said, it's one piece of my larger dark tribe study. And so I would really like to get back to actually writing about dark tribe and sexual spaces. I would really like to get back to writing about dark tribe and sexual spaces. So that's ongoing work. My queer liberation theory work is also ongoing. Most of the data has been analyzed, and I want to write a full-length monograph on theorizing about queer liberation. And I'm very busy these days. I got a major grant to look at 2S LGBTQ+ poverty here in Canada. It's the first study of its kind. It's a lot of money, a lot of people involved that I'm heading, and so that takes up a lot of my time. So that's what has me busy and overwhelmed.
That's a lot. I was just going to go have lunch, but that sounds a lot more productive. Andrew, how about you? What's next for you?
Well, I continue doing work across different media, and I'm one of my primary focuses right now is this series of 4 records. The methodology LP and EP are the first 2 in the release. The 4 records speak to issues of queer pleasure and pandemic. It's interesting to me when COVID first started, and I will not speak of COVID pandemic in the past tense because it continues. And one of the things when it first started for me was I was thinking, wow, what does this do to music? Music as a social tool or device. What will music sound like, especially in the first 2 years when a lot of places closed? I thought, wow, was music going to sound like on a dance floor when we get to the other side of this? Because we've been talking a lot of music talks about touch and feel, and and all the things they talk about, even the kiss suddenly becomes It's kind of territory of
Yeah.
question, right?
That's
So, I'm just this record up here is actually the new record in the series of 4 records. It's called New Variant, and it has a track that called New Variant on it among 4 tracks, and it's so it does address COVID in particular, and it talks about COVID in relationship to how we experience time in our lives, how for a lot of people time stood still. Also, how we've started to develop these digital platforms in richer, more meaningful ways, such as the platform that we're on today. And then also there's a track about the process of mourning and how what bodies are mournable and what more bodies are not mournable. Specifically talking about the substance user who dies and how when a human dies, we often memorialize them in in positive ways. They were this, they were a good person. This is they died in a peaceful way, surrounded by family. But when the drug addict dies, we often can say, well, they had it coming to them. Well,
so all very light topics then, right?
Yeah, so I know my records are real pleasure listening.
Very light topics. We'll look forward to listening to that. No, that's amazing. I want to say thank you so much to both of you for being here. This has been just it's such a connection for me, and just I feel like I'm with 2 people that are part of my dark tribe. Absolutely. So Andrew, thank you so much. Nick, thank you so much for being here. And make sure that you click on the show notes, because in the description below, you're going to have the ability to go and purchase copies of methodologies. And you can reach out to either Andrew or Nick. All of the links I'll put down in the description below. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.
Thanks,
and thank you. And I'll see the rest of you on the next episode of Queerly Us.